I've talked to people from the whole range, the whole spectrum of the Freelee RT4 phenomenon. I've talked to true believers. I've talked to people who lost their faith. I've talked to people who participated, in person in events in Thailand. People who used to be leaders and who went from being leaders to becoming critics. We've definitely come to a point in this phenomenon where people are starting to look back at it as something that's in the past tense. They're writing the history, so to speak, of the wonder that was Freelee the Banana Girl and her short-lived but seemingly important and influential dietary/political movement. But we've also come to a point where people forget. People forget what it was they believed in. People forget why and how this became such a big deal to people and how it totally changed people's lives. To give an example, you talk to people today and they often refer to the RT4 diet as if it were the somewhat relaxed diet you see Freelee herself, what you see her eating on her own videos today. There was a time not too long ago when this diet really taught people that in order to be one of us, in order to be an insider in this movement, you needed to completely refuse to eat salt, completely refuse to eat oil or any food that had overt fats in it, oil of any kind. You need to completely refuse to eat garlic. So a normal meal at a Chinese restaurant that might have a couple of vegan options, became impossible for people. And the passion and fervor with which people denounced one another for failing to live up to the standards of this diet, I can remember very clearly. I think a lot of people, they sort of forget, and then in conversation, if you remind them, they, different examples that they saw themselves come to mind. But I remember one video in which a RT4 follower, true believer, was bitterly, viciously denouncing Henya Mania, a vegan who used to be a leader in that movement, used to be a true believer, and became a critic, became a disillusioned, crestfallen person outside of the movement. I remember this vitriolic, bitter critique of Henya because she ate oatmeal for breakfast. And the guy making this video, he had seen her eat oatmeal for breakfast at a time when she claimed to be on the RT4 diet. Now, obviously, oatmeal is not a raw food. She wasn't eating raw, she was eating it cooked. And obviously, she was eating breakfast before 4 p.m. So there's a sense in which this is just self-evidently true. But I think it's easy for people now to forget. No, this is something people really believed in. People really shamed each other for failing to live up to these standards. And people so passionately wanted to be insiders in this movement that on the one hand, they did reshape their lives. They totally changed their lives to fit in. And on the other hand, when they failed to fit in, they lied about it. Like lying about eating oatmeal for breakfast. And, part of the crumbling of the movement, no doubt, has been a relaxation of those standards to the point where people now have started to forget about just how crazy it was. Okay, but let's sketch out here. What were the sort of fundamental elements? What were the fundamentals that defined this movement when it came up, when it became such an important thing to so many people? Point one on my list here, I think, is the rejection of medical science itself and the so-called self-healing movement or self-healing aspect of what was taught. Again, people now forget. This was huge. And when Freelee was first emerging from the chat rooms and message boards of the vegan demi-monde, and there was a time when she was new on YouTube, and when YouTube wasn't the most important platform, there were really a lot of chat rooms. She came up out of a subculture that was already very hardened in its opposition to the medical establishment, to the medical mainstream. And I think one of the deepest beliefs, one of the most powerful sentiments at the basis of the popularity of RT4 in its early days, and maybe now, along with the dying away of RT4 itself, maybe now it's dying away, was the conviction that food could be used as medicine. That the vegan diet was itself a challenge to the whole medical establishment, to the whole pharmaceutical industry. That this was a notion that you could heal yourself, you could quit your meds, whether you had a tremendously serious physical disease like Crohn's disease, like diabetes, that you could reject the authority and expertise of your medical doctor and get on this vegan diet and heal yourself, or even if you had a psychological disorder, even if you were, for example, diagnosed with schizophrenia, or perhaps you were diagnosed with bipolar disorder, you were on heavy medication for those types of mental problems. So there's a deep-seated conviction here that sort of cuts both ways. On the one hand, it claims that you ought to be able to heal yourself simply through diet, exercise, and sleep. Sleep is in there, improving your sleep. And on the other hand, there's also a reproach to anyone who claims to be an expert, whether it's a dietitian or a medical doctor, or a chemist, or what have you. Just as the followers of this movement claim that they can heal themselves through food as medicine, through so-called natural hygiene, natural medicine, these notions, they also think that if these doctors were truly experts, they would be able to heal themselves. So suddenly, I mean, this links up to the fat-shaming elements, frankly, the fat-shaming psychosis of the movement. This is paired with the attitude that your doctor can't possibly know what he's talking about if he doesn't have a body like Freelee. And meanwhile, Freelee openly says, she has always said, she still says, that her credentials are her body. Her physical appearance is the only credential she needs, and she claims the fact that it is effortless for her to maintain that body. So Freelee herself is someone who actively rejects the authority of doctors, dietary experts, etc., because they claim to know what they're talking about while lacking this crucial credential of having a body with visible abdominal muscles. They're not beautiful enough, they're not slim enough, they're not healthy enough, using a very superficial measure of health. And at the same time, she's claiming that the results she gets from her own diet, that this makes her more of an authority than the accumulated wisdom of all the medical experts in the establishment. Now again, today, that may seem laughable. For someone who looks at those old videos with the sober second thought of the world as we know it in 2016, may seem ridiculous. But again, this really emerged from a subculture on message boards and chat rooms that already really accepted a certain degree of anti-medical establishment hysteria. And for many people, that was linked to the anti-vaccine movement, the belief that vaccines were a massive medical conspiracy. For people who were members of the real so-called natural hygiene movement, they even believe that the concept of a virus is a sort of conspiracy that governments and hospitals are engaged in, and that most of the pharmaceutical industry is some kind of vast immoral conspiracy. Now, that's partly, of course, vegan opposition to vivisection, experimenting on animals, but I mean, it extends to, I've had vegans passionately and sincerely tell me that I ought to believe and take seriously a theory that HIV/AIDS doesn't exist, that HIV/AIDS is fictional. So to just call this pseudoscience is a little bit too shallow, is a little misleading. And sentimentally, I think some of these people truly hate, I mean, hate is the word, medical doctors. Hate and fear. They hate medical doctors, they fear hospitals, they fear the cold, hard truths of modern medical science. And obviously, the line that Freelee was presenting, Freelee and RT4, broadly speaking, this was a much-needed shelter for some people who wanted to escape that reality. It presented a very appealing escapist fantasy for some of those people. Point 2 on my list here, so we've talked about rejection of medical authority, scientific authority, is the rejection of parental authority. And I think it's important to point out this is really a kind of double-edged sword. This cuts in two directions. On the one hand, yes, there's a rich discourse here of actually challenging or rejecting your own parents. So saying to your mom and dad, you don't understand me, I need to go to Thailand and become an athlete, an athlete in quotation marks. I'll come back to that. The meaning of the word athlete within this movement is itself bizarre. Rejection of the authority of one's own parents, but it's also a rejection of oneself as a parental authority. So I think these are linked in a psychologically dynamic way that will be familiar to people who have a background in cult studies or in studying religions that get into the cult category of things in the social sciences. The obsession with vasectomies, the obsession with rejecting the possibility that you will become a parent, that you could be a good parent, that parenting and raising children could be a positive part of a vegan lifestyle. on the one hand, yes, this is linked to a sort of teenage ecological extremism, the idea that the whole planet is just overpopulated. But again, it's also linked to this general anti-authoritarian notion that you kind of spit in the face of your own parents. And really, sorry, I mean, that's a slight exaggeration. Freelee doesn't seem to disrespect her own mother, but there was a lot of material. I don't want to estimate how many hours worth of material there was on YouTube here about the presumed, confrontation with and rejection of one's own parents. That you should reject the expectations your parents place on you. You should reject the expectation that you will be economically productive, economically successful, economically competitive. You reject the rat race, so to speak. You reject a false notion of happiness, of accomplishment, a false ideology of upward mobility. You reject, if you like, the roots of capitalism as they're encountered within your own family unit. And then you're also rejecting the expectations your parents may place on you that you should one day become a parent yourself, that you should carry on the legacy, you should have your own children so that your parents can have grandchildren. So there's a rejection in both directions here, the generation before and the generation to come. It's very powerful. And again, it resembles some elements of some cults, that you are exempting yourself from the economic and social fabric of society. You are exempting yourself from your family. You're no longer a regular child, and you're never going to be a regular parent. You're supposedly an exceptional person to whom those rules don't apply, and to whom those expectations don't apply. Somehow what you're doing in pursuit of the permanent vacation, in pursuit of weight loss and health, raises you up above these people and their expectations of you. And again, when you consider what the praxis of this cult or this movement really is, that's surprising. Because, now, if a Buddhist cult tells that to you, you say, well, okay, but this Buddhist cult is also teaching you meditation, and it's teaching you some supernatural magics and a supernatural cosmology. Like maybe you're even a member of a Buddhist cult that is involved with ghosts, ghost rituals. Okay, so, all right, you joined the Ghostbusters, so it makes sense that you're a special magical person because you believe you have magical superpowers. All right, okay, you can see the logic of that. But this is a set of cult beliefs that are based on happiness, health, happiness, physical beauty, a challenge to the medical system, a form of radical ecology. It is very peculiar, but there's a dotted line tracing this sense of personal exceptionalism to saving the planet, to an ecological notion. But it's a very difficult to trace dotted line. So yeah, that's actually the next point on my list is radical ecology. And really, I'm not going to say too much about this, but people forget. If you've been keeping up with what's been going on in veganism for, say, 4 years, I think you'll remember this. But many, many people just forget how deep this ran, how crazy this was. How many people today, even people who are really fans of RT4, fans of Freelee, how many of you today can really remember catchphrases like burn rubber, not gas? There were other variations of it, like burn calories, not fossil fuels. That by riding a bicycle, this was part of the moral backbone of the movement. And there was a lot of really crass and insulting talk along the lines of anyone who drives a car is a parasite on the planet, is destroying the planet. Sense of moral superiority and complete contempt for anyone who has a job that involves driving a car. Now, I just mentioned, as in terms of my own attitude here, I have never driven a car. I have never owned a car. But everything I buy, like this shirt or these books, they were delivered at some point on a truck or a car or a train or all of the above. So it is. Obviously, on some level, I have my own ecological sentiments. On some level, all of us can relate. But this movement raised those sentiments to a fever pitch of self-righteousness that certainly resembles insanity. And again, I think you have to talk to people face to face in a context where they really feel comfortable admitting to you how much this reshaped their lives. But there were people who got rid of their cars. There were people who quit their jobs so that they could ride a bicycle. There were people who really felt this as a moral, call, as something that took a hold of their soul. Obviously, all these points in this list, they're all rolled into one package. But part of the initial impetus, the moral superiority complex that was built into this cult-like movement for people, definitely, the radical ecology aspect. So again, this is linked to the refusal to have children, the refusal to own a car, the refusal to eat garlic, the refusal to drink coffee. Even those each one of these things may seem small and meaningless. Rolled together, it's quite powerful. Now, already, most vegans are on a bit of an ego trip that I'm aware of and I'm self-critical of, where they regard meat eaters as morally inferior. But now this deepens it. Anyone who drives a car is morally inferior to you. Anyone who drives a car and eats meat is this, again, social parasite destroying the planet. This is the view of the world that these people are drawn into step by step. And again, some of you watching this will be sitting here going, yeah, that's right, but even though maybe it's only 1 year ago or 2 years ago since you really saw that edge of it, it seems so distant now because so many of the fundamental aspects of the movement have been discredited. So that's what I say, worth reflecting on, worth remembering, and also, of course, worth progressing past. One of the characteristics of this movement that in some ways makes it resemble a cult and in some ways makes it strikingly different from a cult is that it is welcoming but severe. It is open to everyone, and yet nobody is ever good enough. To me, that's a very interesting element that bears comparison to other cults, other new religious movements, etc. What do I mean by this? Well, the doors are open. Anyone could watch Freelee on YouTube. Anyone could buy an airplane ticket to Thailand unless they were blacklisted and denounced and so on. There's a sense in which anyone could sign up without even signing a piece of paper. Anyone could start to participate in the forums. Anyone could buy the diet book. Anyone could buy a juicer and start juicing. And again, when you talk to people who are honest, they often reflect on exactly these things. I've seen several people reflect on the fact that they even changed the furniture within their own house to more closely resemble the furniture they saw at that time on Freelee's channel. So they were sitting on the floor instead of eating at a table, so that their fruit was laid out on a tarp on the ground instead of, having normal kitchen habits, and this wasn't required of people. A lot of people really responded to this call away. So it's open to all. And you could start, of course, uploading your own videos. You could start repeating the same mantras, the same slogans. You could, in a sense, join this political movement and start making this difference in this imaginary way. You could start engaging in the same lifestyle activism, which crucially was centered on convincing other people that you were so happy, that you were so healthy because you were living this way. It was welcoming. It was open to all. But as soon as you come in, you learn that nobody's ever really good enough. It seems like nobody's getting the results that they're supposed to be getting. That's one riddle, because, of course, the diet advice doesn't really work. But also, the code of purity involved, it seems like nobody's ever pure enough. People are always getting denounced for things. Now, already, the list I've mentioned, you're supposed to eat 0 salt, 0 oil, 0 overt fats, 0 garlic, 0 caffeine. You're not allowed to eat oatmeal for breakfast. You're supposed to be RT4, obviously, etc., etc. You're not allowed to drive a car. You're not allowed to use gasoline. But there's always an invisible list of things where people could cross some unknowable line and get denounced, which happened week by week on YouTube, and people watched and responded to that very closely. I talked to one man who was gay and is gay, and when certain statements were made about homosexuality, suddenly the sense was the lines shifted. Who's in and who's out? Who accepts this new doctrine? That being gay is a choice. This was, at the time, this was big news, and some people got kicked out, and some people adjusted their attitudes in order to stay in, and so on. So as I say, welcoming but severe, open to all, but as soon as people come in, you realize that nobody's good enough. Nobody's living up to the standard. Again, interesting comparison to some Buddhist cults. Where the objectives of what you're doing are supposed to be supernatural or ineffable, or involve a surreal cosmology with ghosts and gods and multiple incarnations. But while on the one hand there are all these elements of the cult that elevate your sense of self-esteem, that tell you you're special, you're exceptional, suddenly you're better than your own brothers and sisters, you're better than your boss at work, you're better than almost everybody you know, because everybody you know is either eating meat or using gasoline or these other things. But on the other hand, you're dealing with this sense of dejection because you're never as good as Freelee. Never. And of course, she especially viciously denounced some women who really were her competitors, who could have been claimants to the same type of fame, same type of influence, same type of dietary advice, or what have you. I think enough said about that. For those of you who remember, you'll know what I'm talking about, but I admit I'm not really spelling out fully here the types of lines that people were always crossing and people were being punished for, people were being denounced for. But definitely anyone who's lived through this period of time will remember people who 1 week were being praised as being real, diehard supporters of the cause and leaders of the cause, the next week would be denounced as fake as fuck, as being not real, and as violating some combination of the precepts, stated and unstated, that defined who was an insider, who was an outsider. I think another element here I was reminded of recently is actually opening up the identity of the jock, of the athlete itself. Now, just digress for a moment here. What does it mean to be an athlete? Where I grew up in Canada, the notion of who is an athlete is very narrow indeed. You're not an athlete just because you go to the gym. You're not an athlete just because you casually play basketball, for instance, on the street, on a street court, or play hockey on the street. In Canada, people play hockey on the street. In Canada, where I grew up, to be an athlete means you play competitive sports at a competitive level. Period. So you rank. You're in the charts. And the, swagger, the self-importance that athletes exhibit in Canadian society, which may be less than Australian society, it may be more than some other society, that corresponds to the type of sacrifices they're supposed to be making to be at that competitive level. All kinds of people, countless. I mean, I've seen so many examples of people who, in reality, were shy hippie types. Let's be quite specific. They were shy hippies who maybe did yoga before they got into RT4, suddenly started describing themselves as athletes and acting with the self-confidence and arrogance of an athlete or of a stereotypical jock. People who had never been tough guys started imitating the tough guy behavior of the leaders of RT4. People started talking about themselves as athletes and talking about athleticism as part of this movement in a way that to me is surreal. And now I don't really want to hate on any of these people. Like, in a sense, anyone can come on the internet and say they're an athlete. I don't hate you for that. But that contrast is really bizarre. And the self-confidence those people are exhibiting, to me, rings hollow and false all the time. I've seen people come on again imitating the leaders of RT4, describing themselves as jocks, as athletes, as alpha personalities, as domineering natural leaders. And even while they're saying it, I look in their eye and I think, you've never led anything. You've never been in a competitive sports league of any kind, like not even at a low level. You don't know what it's like to have to wake up at 5:30 in the morning and show up at 6 a.m. and be yelled at by your coach, to be denigrated by a coach in a team sport, which is not nice. I mean, again, one of the reasons why a lot of athletes can be nasty is that they are themselves getting yelled at and denigrated by their coach or by the more senior players, by the better players. They're being held up to kind of impossible standards all the time. Now, again, I'm not saying this. I'm not glorifying what it means to be an athlete. But this movement suddenly opened up the identity of the athlete, and again, in a really kind of morally seductive way, linked athleticism to activism and erased the boundary between the two, so that people began to think of athleticism as activism and began to think that the only true activists were athletes. So I guess that leads in nicely to the next topic, which is the concept of lifestyle activism itself, which presented a powerful and seductive illusion that what you needed to do to change the world, to save the planet, to save the animals, to promote veganism, was simply to communicate that you were healthy and happy, was simply to glorify the lifestyle itself, in part through self-indulgence. That by being on permanent vacation, for example, but not necessarily, not everyone was on permanent vacation, but by going on vacation and filming yourself in your bikini, showing what you eat, showing how happy you are, showing how healthy you are, and making testimonials, which is like many other cult groups, coming on camera and saying you used to have this disease and you cured it. You used to have this disorder and you cured it. How? You bought the diet book, you followed the diet, you changed your whole life. You became athletic. Before you were a couch potato, you started riding your bicycle, you started eating exactly what the book tells you to eat, and lo and behold, your diseases were cured. And fill in the blank. Some of you guys have heard this 100 times before. And some of you will have heard, like, maybe not 100 times, but at least 20 times, people who performed that script, people who came on camera with great conviction and told that to you, and they later admit, actually, their illness was never cured. Their illness kept coming back again and again. Actually, their medical problem, whatever it was, wasn't solved by this peculiar vegan diet. And there are often other confessions. Maybe the change in their exercise habits wasn't so great. Maybe the change in their weight loss or weight gain wasn't so great, and so on. Many people who later have reconsidered their position within the cult have recanted that narrative. But for a brief period, this is very seductive to people, the line between activist and athlete was blurred. And the notion that the great secret, the great catalyst for social change in this planet is happiness, is your personal happiness. That all you have to do is share with the world how happy and how healthy you are. That's a powerful delusion that appeals to people at all ages, people who feel powerless. I think there were 16-year-olds who were still in high school who saw that, and it called out to them. They thought, that's me. That's what I can do. I can put on a bikini. I can tell people that I've cured my acne or cured Crohn's disease or cured diabetes or cured schizophrenia through this diet. I can come on and make these testimonials. I can film myself having fun. I can show how happy I am to ride a bicycle. Riding a bicycle does not make you that happy. Okay, it's ridiculous. That in itself is ridiculous. I can talk about my personal transformation, how 5 minutes ago I was a hippie who had no self-confidence and was shy, and now I'm an athlete with this very confrontational attitude. This type of, because this is part of it, right, was this transformation, that made powerless people feel powerful. And it linked their totally subjective sense of health and happiness to saving the planet. And again, looking at that now in 2016, it seems like a totally absurd delusion. But looking back over the last 4 years, there were people who wanted to believe in that and who fiercely defended their right to believe in it. And again, someone like Henya Mania, who later lost her faith, you can hear her reflecting that whenever someone said something that challenged the orthodoxy of the diet, even when that diet was making her personally more and more sick, her health problems were continuing, she was going to hospitals, trying to get help, she was having many health problems, she would herself viciously attack and denounce other people who questioned the health impacts of the diet or questioned the miraculous results. That, she's admitted this in reflecting afterwards, that the need for her to defend the cause was so strong. She had to believe in this book, she had to believe in this method, and so on. So what I've left to the absolute end of this video was health, weight loss, physical beauty. And I think that's just because I've had other videos talking about that. I got an email within Patreon. I got a message from a Patreon supporter. And she was well into her 20s. Which, let's say she was 24 years old. She was 24, 26. But she admitted to me that the first time she saw the image of Freelee's midsection, of those abdominal muscles, of that shape of that part of her body, she just thought, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do whatever this woman says. I'm going to follow whatever advice she says so I can get those results, so I can look like that. And ironically, I've seen photos of this woman and videos of this woman, before, during, and after. She was in great shape. She was already a very athletic person before she became a follower of this cult, and she gained weight and got out of shape because she did follow the RT4 diet, as many people have. I have a long interview with Leah Pramsel, who gained a lot of weight on this channel. Just scroll back a few videos, you'll see that. It's an interview with someone who had that experience. Yes, vanity, yes, wanting to be beautiful, yes, that's something that drew people in. But as much as we might talk about it, I think now, in looking back and writing the history, the wonder that was Freelee and the RT4 phenomenon, I think we forget that even though that got people's attention, it's easy to forget that these other factors that I've just enumerated were what kept people inside, were what made this something that had political and even spiritual ramifications, that made people believe this wasn't just about their vanity, this wasn't just about having great abdominal muscles or a great figure, that this was about saving the planet. And On some level, I wish I could say that spirit, that enthusiasm could be recaptured, could be saved, could be channeled into a more positive, a more political, a more pragmatic, a more genuinely helpful, and even, dare I say, a more nutritious form of veganism. But I don't think it can. I think the wonder that was Freelee and the RT4 diet is a chapter in the history of this movement, as unique and bizarre as the anarcho-primitivist chapter. You can search for that on my channel. You can hear my remarks of that came and went before. As unique and bizarre as the deep ecology movement that came and went. One ideology after another comes and goes. I think right now, the abolitionist movement of Gary Francione, we're seeing it come and go. Direct action everywhere. I think we've seen one fad after another come and go. And yes, a lot of people have powerful sentiments. They want to help. They want to make the world a better place. But they become members of cult-like movements that have all the wrong answers because fundamentally they start by asking all the wrong questions.